Hello and welcome to another Ammach Project Archive series. In this one, we're looking at our older interviews from 2011 and 12, and I think you'll find them fascinating. We're kicking off this episode with David Griffin of Exopolitics UK. Now, David takes us through the war, the Falklands War, absolutely fascinating material. And what a surprise some of that material will be. And I'm sure that a lot of you will never have even heard of it. And what is interesting is that David shows some rare footage of some of the Royal Marines in their snow gear in the Falklands. I had a call from someone purporting to be the son of the father who was one of those Royal Marines and identified himself as such. He said his father didn't want to speak, but he was relaying a message. And this is interesting. This is another whole layer to what goes on in these remote places. And it was that his father told him that a submarine had emerged, British, and in it were some very, very high-ranking military people. I'll say military, I don't know what service, but they knew they were very high-ranking and involved in medical. And what they came to do was to dig up, can you believe this, dig up some of the bodies from the 1918 flu epidemic. And the reason that there were bodies there was because 1918, there was a ship that ran aground and the crew all died of this flu. Now, what were the military doing there, unbeknownst to anybody else, certainly unbeknownst to the Royal Marines, digging up bodies, bearing in mind the current scenario of 2022 that we've just endured? David also goes on to share with us some more interesting information and links with the Marconi deaths. And there is a link here. Now, what's very interesting, and for people who haven't seen it, I do urge you to have a look at my interview with Hilary Porter. It's in 2 sections. And Hilary actually worked for Marconi, who was Britain's leading defense, the go-to darling for defense on the planet at one time. She was there at the time, and there was a breach of their top security area, and that involved ET. You'll have to go and watch the interviews to see the whole thing. Not only that, her ex-husband was working with the Royal Air Force, the defence establishment there in the UK, and he was involved in telemetry. And I'm pretty sure it's 64. You'll have to check on the interview. And that was during his shift. They were in touch with Australia and involved with the launch of one of the missiles when a craft descended, landed, and that got 2 occupants. Guess what? The launch didn't take place. Isn't that interesting? So Marconi seems to be involved in a lot of things, and what David has to say about it is yet another layer linked with the Falklands War. And then we go forward to the 2010 Gulf of Mexico oil spill and what came about from leaked laptop information, where there was a channel open during this, what seemed to be an emergency, which involved many, many, many nations in the acquisition. They called it Cargo B. And what was Cargo B? Well, check out this interview with David Griffin and you will find out. Enjoy this very, very full episode.
Interesting, actually mentioned Richard Hall because apparently on one of his shows, doing a preview to the Liverpool Exopolitics event, when the title was read out that I was covering the ET element to the Falklands, obviously because not many people have heard that there's an ET element to the Falklands, so it all sounds a little bit comical at the start, and he claimed that I'd got the whole thing from one of Timothy Good's books, which I then went and found on my friend's book cabinet, and there's all of a paragraph that Timothy Good had found out about the Falklands War. So none of this is on the internet, and it's all pretty original.
Can I just say, this is the result of also 2 years' work, David, isn't it, as well?
Two years' work, yes, and I'm indebted also to a contactee called Alex Newald, who's New Zealand, who I've basically been in communication with and has been most helpful with this. So the one point I wanted to make, although it's based on a contact story, because of course people often give you flack for that sort of thing, it's just, oh, it's a ET contact account, but I hope what people will see by the time they finish watching this video, there's a sort of mosaic of other inputs and bits of data, just like this, the deaths of the Marconi people, which is again, well, many people on the internet will have heard of, but you know, very few people have actually made any links regarding what actually went on there with the Marconi deaths in Britain. So basically, I have put together a couple of years worth of research, and I hope that it's got somewhere, and it's still ongoing at the moment. So I'll just flick through and try and give you a overview of what it's about. So we've got, you have to bear with us because we've got a rather rudimentary system of some of the files and images I used previously. So from the X-Files movie, which interestingly enough, I had a vague idea what it was about, but interestingly the whole film, when I watched it back again, was very much so uncannily close to a lot of the stuff I found out. So we know that fiction imitates fact, and art and all that, vice versa. So
we can't show the X-Files clip for copyright reasons, but as David says, when he watched the material, he found the details pretty well aligned with his own research.
The Illuminati guy is actually British, and he's the one that actually breaks ranks with the Illuminati. If you go back and watch the film, they have this crisis meeting because this certain substance has been found, this virus, and it's the British guy in his British house that decides to go and find Mulder and basically give him this antivirus, this thing. But if you rewatch that clip or the whole movie, there's tells you a lot more about what's actually going on, and pans out into geopolitical events that I found were going on with this actual issue itself, and it very much mirrors what is found out here, which we're going to come to. But yes, it's a black oil like substance, which puts a whole new meaning on this whole idea that we're hunting for oil, particularly the South African intelligence agency down in the Falklands. He claims that the British struck gold, and you know, this whole, again, metaphors, oil, gold, black gold, starts to get quite crazy. Again, we got that headline, I remember, this is from the Sun at the time, and so I just made the point that you know, underneath this war, it looked like something else was perhaps going on. And you know, the fact that, if you know, many people said this, why on earth did we send all these fleets down for these tiny little islands, given what we said about oil?
It did seem extraordinary.
Yeah, oil's really hard to extract from down there, the oil rights and things like that. But we know lots of things have been going off in down in the Antarctica. There's the
behind the media hype that boosted Thatcher's poll ratings lay a hidden agenda that has not been publicly linked to the war before, and the ET aspect of the scenario are both central, but sufficient evidence exists to make a strong case without it.
Yeah, and that's the point I wanted to sort of say, that you know, because we get a lot of flack in this scene for contact things that are just based on what ETs have said and things, and there's you know, I'm not denigrating that, which I hope you'll find by the end of this sort of talk how central the ET issue is to all these political events we just see the surface of.
Well, also, if you think about the technology issue, spin on the concept of keeping oil and gas and coal going.
Yeah.
In the light of electromagnetic technology.
And there's another element to this, which probably haven't got time to go into, about a free energy device that came from a ship linked to this ET group that was shot down and then went onto the international market and was bought by Saudi Arabia. But that...
no, I think we need to get that in.
Well, that's long. Just when I was at university in Bradford, I'd just been to see Pink Floyd The Wall on huge IMAX in Bradford, and we went to a curry house with one of my friends. Having a curry, there was a guy opposite with his partner, and we must have been discussing something, and he butted in and he said, if you want to know something about the Falklands, there was a lot more going on in the Falklands than you realise. And he pointed like this and he said, things going on. And of course, not having had a huge interest in this field at that point, we just left it. But that was one of those things that it stuck in my head. I was like,
and you know, when he was doing that gesture,
yeah.
did you think that indicated some kind of aerial activity of a...
I am pretty sure that's what he meant, because he also looked a little bit like I don't want to say much more, and also a little bit disconcerted about having said it. So that was just one of those things. But as we'll see, he most probably was correct, because we've since found a couple of documents that say that. So as part of this building up evidence, because I didn't want to just come out and say, yes, I found this ET issue to the Falklands, then started advertising on military sites both in Britain and Argentina. Also got in touch with Exopolitics Argentina, weren't very helpful. This year's the current 30th anniversary. In its usual way, wants to wave its flag, and we sent, what did we do to mark that? We didn't go and do it quietly. We sent Prince William down to, which creates huge headlines, and that annoys the Argentinians have currently got a new government in, and as part of this, they're getting quite gung-ho about the Falklands again. So just at the time when it was all ramping up, the Argentina, who are in economic crisis, the whole thing to do with what they call the Malvinas, is hyping up again. They're going, we want these islands back, and it's oh no, we don't want a repeat of that. And what do? We send Prince William down as if to territorially stake our claim, get our big penis down there in the form of Prince William. Not that Prince William's a big penis. Part of this, I was trying to gather evidence, and one Argentinian researcher sent me, and Joanne can actually pronounce the name of this person, because I can't, because she's very good at Spanish. Yeah. So this very famous contactee that I must just say had his case validated by J. Allen Hynek, and spoke at Argentinian's main UFO event, and also got flown with Argentinian security, interestingly enough, got flown to do a talk. I presume it must have been Lachlan, I don't know where, but a big US-based one. So this is
Ricardo Jesus Velázquez.
Perfect. And essentially, in the run-up, the year before the Falklands War, so we're talking, 81-ish, he was basically picked up by a UFO, had no prior experiences with UFOs or ETs. ETs landed, they took him to a base in the Andes, a very high-tech base. He said the rock opened up, in they went, huge screens everywhere. He claimed there were numerous ETs watching world events, including one, if I remember, of New York, one of something else, somewhere else, some other forest somewhere, and obviously monitoring the planet, as we often hear in contactee accounts. They're doing the usual stories that we of course hear from ETs about, once there was a civilization called Atlantis, then we had a pole shift and we're damaging the Earth. The usual stuff, ten a penny that we hear from contact cases. What was most interesting, given the timing of when they picked him up, I mean, this is his second contact, so we got here February 1982. So again, better remind people, the Falklands War started officially in April 1982 and ended in June 1982. So a few months before, you can read there, I've highlighted in yellow, they took him to the same underground base. They had a look at these big 3D viewing screens, which they showed him something on before. This time he thought it was something like the South Pole, could see the ice flows and could see battles taking place. He then came to a point where he realised that it was a war in the Falkland Islands, so he must have realised somehow recognised some sort of landmark.
I think here when it says I was taught, I think it was I was shown.
Shown, yeah. This is my. I had to translate this using Google online translation, because it wasn't in English. My Argentinian website. So then saw warplanes, battles, prisoners being taken, etc. But interestingly, what the ETs explained to him then was that Britain was going to win the Falklands War, Argentina was going to lose. But the point that really struck me, having done the bits of research that I've done, was this was it was a political topic, but it was far more to do with business than it was to do with war.
So then you have to ask what that business is.
Well, exactly, given that we were shown this gun-ho flag-waving proper war scenario, that's what we were told about. It's like, let's go and save these islanders and get our territory back. Well, that's a war thing. So another quick point, that basically he then told this story to an Argentinian UFO researcher, and the military intelligence found out about him, and up until the start of the Gulf War, so from January to April 82, he was then repeatedly imprisoned and tortured for having said this. That they obviously thought he was a spy, or they knew he'd met these ETs. I don't quite know.
That's just horrendous, isn't it? I mean,
well, it is when you're there telling just the truth. Someone that isn't experiencing this situation of having met ETs, and then is just telling his truth to what he thinks is a UFO research. I just think these people are scum that go and hand these things over to confidentially and then go and hand them over to military. I don't know why on earth they'd go and do something.
I guess they think they're doing something positive to help.
Yeah.
To forewarn.
Wasn't too positive in his case, though.
No, it certainly wasn't.
We discussed information about sightings down there and things like that. Well, interestingly enough, in the we've had these endless release, which of course Nick Pope and the great David Clarke.
We're talking about the Ministry of Defence.
Ministry of Defence files, yeah,
Right.
that get released. I think we're on our penultimate. This is the 9th release, I think, at the moment. That came out in July. Interestingly enough, someone alerted me to this. Interestingly, I don't think you'll read this bottom bit, but essentially this is from some military body that I couldn't quite trace from the letters above there. This is a poor copy image that we've had to take from PowerPoint here, but essentially it says, if I link through and read it, it's the last paragraph. This is from some high up soldier or parliamentarian of some sort, someone in military intelligence. I'm sure that I'm not the only person to note the sharp fall in the number of UFO reports received since the beginning of the Falklands dispute. I have received a letter, I think, claiming that large numbers of UFOs have been seen in the vicinity of the task force, and then it's a little military joke at the end, presumably by little green men in ponchos. All I'm linking it to is my guy in the curry house was saying stuff going on, and then of course we have then an official MOD file also. There's also another guy who basically on the side of Argentina where they had a military base. This is at the start of the war. Claimed a huge UFO came over, and all these Argentinian troops went out, saw this huge, great UFO, huge apparently lights, and in his report, a army jeep got moved 3 miles from one and got plonked in another field. At the start of the war, so April 82, yeah. So that was actually when war was going off. So again, so all these surrounding areas showing that area is pretty active. Earlier we have the South Georgia so-called invasion that was a bit of a strange false flag in its own way, because actually no troops were involved, but the British used that as their starting point. There was lots of puffing and blowing in Parliament, which Joanne mentioned, with Lord Carrington, who, as we'll see in a minute, was standing up and constantly saying we need to do a lot more about these bloody arges and start getting a task force down there faster. Now, we think he knew a little bit, having looked at this area, I think he knew a little bit more, as we're aware in Britain. And as I was speaking to Grant Cameron actually at the end of the last conference, he was saying things like he thinks there's probably 3 or 4 people at top rank that know about this stuff and issue the orders down. And I agree with him. I don't think there's many more people on that. And of course, we know from the likes of Desmond Leslie and all the people that were linked to him, and Prince Philip has this interest that these lords, these aristocrats, have had a long-standing interest in this UFO issue.
Like Mountbatten as well.
Mountbatten have, and of course they can then influence the military and politicians. And watch the X-Files clip at the start. We have a meeting, a British household with these people from different parts of the world, headed by this one British aristocrat. So, you know, this sort of stuff ties in and loops. Italy, I mean, there was some issues that I wanted to just basically point out very, very quickly, that we've had a long history down there. If you go to that wonderful place, that font of knowledge, Wikipedia, for instance, you type in Russia's interest in the South Atlantic or in Antarctica, you'll find literally from the 1900s onwards, Russia is listed as expedition, mineral expedition, research this expedition, and it fills pages. They were out there, and it accelerated. You'll get the same, of course, for the US, also going down there. So something is going on there beyond what I could assume was just for looking at penguins, taking pictures of polar bears, and looking at the odd bit of mineral. You know, what you then also notice, as you find with Admiral Burr's mission in 1947, you find that in the post-war period, I know we had all the Nazi stuff that was going on, something accelerated. In the Cold War period, something accelerated to the point that now every major nation has a full-time base down there, and they're getting more towards the centre of the Antarctic. So something's going on around there that's a bit more beyond a certain area, Vostok, that they're very interested in, that they seem to be have an awful lot of interest in, and are doing this deep sea drilling that we'll come to later. So also mention that, of course, the British, very few people know, the British sent a military operation in. It's called Operation Tarabin, with a science brigade that they sent with them, but they actually sent commandos in to go and grab part of Antarctica. This was in response to Germany, who of course went and put flags and found New Schwabenland, and Argentina had done the same on Deception Island, which is just at the north side of Antarctica. Again, all this, you've got to remember your geography, which you'll see in a minute. All this is very close to the South Atlantic, where the Falkland Islands are, and the islands that we're going to discuss, the South Sandwich Islands, are even closer to the Antarctic. Arctic, hugely cruel conditions. This is why the whole argument with oil falls down, because apparently getting oil from down there is just so prohibitive, because the conditions for getting oil out of the seas are rough, flying a base, keeping staff down there. So this is the boring historical side to things. So we're going to get to it. I just had to give a bit of background, because I can't just come in with this straight stuff that I'm going to... Well, it does when you ask why at the end, towards the end of the Second World War, when we were exhausted from all this other stuff, were we then so having these arguments over this piece of ice, this huge piece of ice down there, that something was going on. And again, as I then mentioned, a lot of this could be put down to the Nazis. We've got, this amazing quote from Karl Dönitz, who is in charge of the submarine fleet. Can you read that out from there, the green bit? That was his quote.
Germany's submarine fleet is proud that it created an unassailable fortress for the Führer on the other end of the world.
Yeah. So that's, some people have put that down. Well, the Nazis were looking for something, and they left something there. And interestingly, it's just being released. There's a whole map now that's been released that the Russian Smersh, which I think is their intelligence arm of the Soviets, have released this map showing how a submarine can get through Antarctica and come up in this land. And it was amazing. It's come up in the land of Agartha. And these instructions were amazing, and showed how they could go under this base. Anyway, so that's one reason. Now we get on to the region. And this is where it starts getting interesting and important. So for geography, because a lot of people probably get a bit stuck with whereabouts we're talking about. So of course Argentina, you can see with the big land strip, and Chile, etc., is all down there. If on the inset of the image, you can see there the Falkland Islands at the top, and these little strip that are bending around this sort of backwards C shape there. The very bottom one of those is an island called Southern Thule, which is spelled Thule, but I think in German is pronounced Thule.
Thule. Does that have anything to do with the Thule party that Hitler was so fond?
Yeah, because weren't they the party
that was linked to the esoteric,
the vril energies.
Metaphysical.
Well, you've got to ask yourself, because also that's called Southern Thule, and I got confused. I call it Thule, but in the Arctic, the Americans have a base that's called Thule in the Arctic as well. So we have a big Thule base in the Arctic, and we have a Southern Thule, which is, as we see, is.
And just to put it into perspective, there's the UK way up there, the little white bit, and there is islands down there. So that's about 8,000 miles, is it?
8,000 miles to the Falklands, and what we did at the start, the Americans gave us use of Ascension Island, which is halfway in the midpoint, essentially just one big volcanic landing strip, and we did this amazing Vulcan bomber trip of refueling and went and bombed the runways of the Falklands. That was our first move of the war, as we sent the task fleet down there. So we went to try and stop them having a landing zone, and that was the first real part of the war that went on. So that was just to give an idea, but it's this final island at the bottom of the chain that creates all the interest. So that was a quick history of the Falklands. What's the interesting point to make out is when you look at the arguments that have gone on. There's been the usual stuff between powers like Spain and France and Portugal all over this area. It all goes very quiet, and then in the 1960s, the UN start discussing rights between Argentina and Britain for these islands. So it goes to UN level in the 1960s. And as we'll see, the 1970s, we get this thing that actually kicks off this whole debate, which is the base being built on the Thule Island that we'll see there. Basically, war finishes, 1982, Argentinian surrender, diplomatic relations resume in 1990. So that's the potted history of the war. This just to make a point about how big on a level that we didn't even see. If the level we're going to be talking about is even below this, then what came out after the war was in a book written by President Mitterrand's psychoanalyst, who apparently used to go and see regularly, and he gave a quote in his book.
"Excuse me," Mitterrand begins, apologising for his late arrival. "I had a difference of opinion to settle with the Iron Lady. What an impossible woman, that Thatcher. With her 4 nuclear submarines on mission in the southern Atlantic, she threatens to launch the atomic weapon against Argentina, unless I supply her with the secret codes that render deaf and blind the missiles we have sold to the Argentinians. Margaret has given me very precise instructions on the telephone. and that's taken from a book on President Mitterrand by his psychoanalyst.
Yeah, and the point was there, of course, that rather ironically, the French had sold the Exocet missiles that actually ended up sinking or certainly damaging HMS Sheffield in the Falklands War. They have these secret shut-off codes that you can stop them working, and Thatcher wanted those. So it's essentially the Falklands War nearly went nuclear, apparently, according to the threat. So that again, something we
who knows about that?
No one knows. I know that I found that in an obscure book. Obviously, unless you've read President Mitterrand's analysis, his psychoanalysis book, then you don't hear about that sort of thing. So I thought that just illustrated a bit about how far the actual thing went. At the time, that for her to make that sort of statement carried a lot more weight than maybe it would now. If you threatened to launch nukes in the 80s, and that. I was going to say, I think the Falklands went nuclear in a slightly different way than we would have thought, or may have gone nuclear. Flags everywhere, but it seems that every nation was doing that as well. It seems there was a scramble for that area for some reason.
Well, that's a really great point in which to have a little break. And Exopolitics UK expose. Story about ETs and the Falklands War. David, thanks very much. Let's continue.
So essentially, after giving that little potted history of the whole Falklands War, what we actually find out, of course, look into the history, you look back into parliamentary questions, etc. You find out that in 1976 a base was built on Thule Island, which is the one that we showed on the map that was there before. The Argentinians strangely went and built this base on Thule Island. It was supposedly a scientific base. On the picture there you can see that doesn't give a good view. I've got some other footage of it later, but that was supposedly a weather monitoring station and other things. Strangely enough, had about between 10 and 18 staff, and there was an armed military contingent on there as well. And so of course the British from 1976 started noticing this, because we had a ship called HMS Endurance, which many people will have heard of. Interestingly, was about to be scrapped. The only thing we had down there, this wasn't a warship, this was an icebreaker. And this was sending helicopters over and keeping an eye on this base and what was going on around there. So what you've got to keep in mind as we go through these next few slides, this next bit of information, is what did the Thatcher government or the military or the upper echelons of the military, and because of course we know that this thing doesn't pervade throughout the whole of the government, certainly not down into parliamentary politics, what did was it the chicken or the egg? Did the Argentinian war take place because of the reasons that we were given over land and territory, oil rights, all the other reasons we were given, or was something else going on? Because by the end of this, I think you'll see that this other issue was far larger. They essentially start monitoring what's happening on this Thule Island, and remember these conditions. If you can see, that base is built off the ground. The conditions here, it goes down to like minus 60 degrees Celsius. I think I read the whole Antarctic is down to that.
Is it a large island, David?
Thule Island it's a volcanic island. I've got a large shot of it in a minute. It's a volcanic island, ice sort of plateaus, but no, it's not big at all. I don't know the actual size of it. If you go and have a look, you'll see that compared to the other islands, it's one of the larger ones, like sort of triangular shaped, but certainly it's pretty small. Interesting things are actually happening on the island, as we'll find out. So behind the scenes, some diplomatic stuff went on between the Lord Carrington, who was the sort of foreign guy, and he, before anything had broken out, they send down a nuclear submarine to keep an eye on the whole process. So that's the base on Thule Island down there that the Argentinians had built. What we then find out, and you'll have to bear with me for this because I actually found this information out from a contactee regarding this blue extraterrestrial race. There's not a lot known about them, but as you will know if you look into sort of Vedic Hindu literature, you'll find the references to apparently one humanoid race is one of these 5 strands of humans that were genetically put on the earth. I think I'm right in saying this wasn't their gods, it was actually us humanoids. There were humanoids in a blue form. You can't find constant references to these blue-skinned races, so they are there. They are in sort of our genetics or ET. Someone stopped me at the end of the last conference and said that Dolores Cannon had done several cases where blue ETs were mentioned. So again, you're back to sort of America there. I don't know why, you don't come across it much in the certain British literature. This guy, foot, he says, 4.5 foot, ish-like in a way with no greys, but certainly seem more hybrid-like in a way.
I've come across them with some of our people that we've spoken to, and they seem to be the little, quite smallish beings.
This guy actually got taken to their planet. No time to go into that, but the guy I'm on about, Alec Newell, is an engineer. He's not, he's not some sort of dippy, new agey contactee. The guy's an engineer, had no interest in this area, and went and got taken to.
He was actually taken for 10 days, I understand.
10 days, yeah, 10 days. His car taken off the road in New Zealand and got taken to their planet. They're from a planet called Haven. Don't know if that's the actual term. To a planet called Haven. An amazing story. Then got dropped back, and many things started to happen in him then. So he briefly mentioned this in the book and about the Falklands, and so I started this dialogue with him and got a little bit more information about it. So essentially, to summarise, we find out that these blues had a base underground. So while the Argentines had one on top, these blues had a base underground. They'd had one there since World War I era, and this is the crucial part that you have to remember, and the whole reason they had to do it. Remember how far this island is basically the closest you can get to Antarctica, so obviously the colder you get on this oil substance, they had to do it in an absolutely freezing cold temperature. This stuff gets active when it starts to get warm. It stays dormant while it's under the earth, under the seabed apparently is where it be, and so as long as it's under pressure and is cold, it stays sort of dormant. They're working on this, apparently engineer it, because it's been put there since the start of, I presume, when we were put on the planet or a previous race. The danger is that it can be it sends out signals, it can be communicated with, and it can be.
So we're saying then that the Argentinians had a relationship with the ETs for, we suspect, a long time?
Don't know how long. Apparently very high-ranking Argentines were well aware of this in the military, were aware of this.
That the US is also aware of this mission, and given it's the UK's territory, they must also be aware. So just to come back to that oil issue, how did anybody become aware that there was a substance, an oil-like substance, that was essentially like a piece of
it's like a sentient AI.
A sentient,
that had Keanu Reeves in recently. It also had a black mass that then went and took over and literally went through all the biology of life.
Interesting how this is seeping into then. I mean, it's like, everything in plain
insane.
sight.
James Cameron, I believe, is way high up, and I think the CIA, all these people talk to these sort of people. That film Prometheus was, if you notice, was all about black goo that then morphed into creatures. And
Ridley Scott, arguably one of the greatest living directors, is set to release a prequel to his 1979 mega hit, Alien, Prometheus. One of the most anticipated sci-fi films in recent memory. Infowars.com research analysis shows Prometheus is not just a film, but a revelation of the method, revealing the deepest secrets of the Illuminati mystery religion. I do have a lot of contacts in the media, as viewers and listeners know, and I have been able to secure a copy of an early script, and it follows very closely from the trailer I've seen and other leaks. And I'm not going to give the entire film away here, but in synopsis, this is a film about the origins of humankind with a super race of near immortal genetic engineers who are contemplating a genetic overwrite or rewrite of the planet Earth when meddling humans stumble in to the magician's laboratory. They are punished for their trespass.
It was so wrong.
The so-called space jockey is the advanced species that have engineered humans back on Earth and produced the bioweapon that we know of as the classical alien that burst out of your chest after feeding on the food in your intestines. The reason we're taking time out to examine Prometheus is because its storyline, its plot, mirrors that of many ancient societies. And the ideas presented in Prometheus are at the core of Western secret societies.
These are ancient civilizations that were separated by centuries, and yet this same pictogram was discovered in every one of them.
Please tell me you can read that.
I think they want us to come and find them.
From ideas developed by the ruling class of this planet. And I want to be clear, every major globalist we look at, going back more than 160 years, is completely and totally obsessed with the idea that off-world aliens are controlling this planet and giving them hidden knowledge. By the 1870s, T.H. Huxley Group and their X Club was dominating the Royal Society in England. The dominant theory within the X Club was that humans had been seeded here, along with most other life forms, by advanced beings from space. From the inception of Darwin's theory on the origin of species, evolutionary scientists never believed for a minute that life simply started on its own. That evolution is not some random, slow system developing by chance, but is actually directed by off-world seeders, terraformers, creators of worlds. Even the discoverer of DNA, Francis Crick, promotes the idea that life was seeded on this planet in what he calls directed panspermia.
All I know is that when he was taken in the 90s, Alex Newell was taken to this planet. They basically gave him a complete potted history of the Earth, and he didn't remember a lot of this. He came through back to him gradually. But one of the things that stuck in his head was the fact that a certain race had put this, that the Earth was formed with this as part of the geology. There were at certain places around the planet, and we found 2 or 3 of them, we think now, where this intelligent oil has been put, and it's almost like being ready to activate, and it's stayed dormant until now. And as we go on, you'll find some quite scary episodes of where we think it started to be activated. It's more or less like it's a gooey substance that has all these magical morphing qualities and stuff, but on the level of other things that it does, I don't quite know, and I don't want to leap into other areas because I don't know exactly how it actually functions. But we have got some evidence of it doing very strange psychological things, which we'll come to when we get to the Marconi people.
So we're basically looking at a black fluidic substance, like oil-like in viscosity, let's say, has some kind of sentience to it, and it's triggered in certain parts of the planet is speculated or known.
Yeah, and yours is a good point, because did the ETs come and tell the Americans were told about their mission? So the Americans, I think, were told that they were coming to try and de-engineer this oil because it was about to be active. Comes back again and again, and then comes off in another issue that we'll find too, the Gulf of Mexico. Is the quote that comes back time and time again for me is, the Russians are way ahead on this technology, and the Russians are more aware about what this technology is. My deep looking into the Russians, how many times they've been down there, and how many times you have to go and look at photograph a penguin. They were down there building bases in the 30s, 40s, and then accelerated in the 60s, and they're way ahead on this lake.
What triggered human awareness as to having a sentient...
I think the ETs had to. I think if you imagine the way ETs work, they often work, they can't always do things by secret. They know we're now at the stage where we can detect their craft. Most, I think, chemtrails is about, that's always been my UFO detector. We have certain radars since the 40s that can detect metallic UFOs, but those that are of a more trans-dimensional nature, I think this chemtrail thing is a way of detecting these ships. The ETs are aware of our level of technological know-how now, so they can't just come to the planet anymore like they used to back in the old days and just do things. They have to literally ask permission, and some of that's to do with the first directive, that of course you can't intervene in a developing planet in certain ways. So what you do is you ask permission on certain levels. So I think they said that the Argentinian government, they needed to work in that area, so they asked their permission. They said they perhaps didn't tell them too much. The Americans they knew were more or less global leaders, so they told them a little bit, but they basically say, away and let us do it. This is for the good of your planet. Now, the wider issues of this is, what is this stuff doing on the planet? Is it a forming agent that somehow when it activates it wipes the planet again, or was it a weapon put by another alien race, which is what they say? Don't know if they're telling the truth on that, but anyway, we'll get to a bit more of this. But the point I made at the end there on that last point was saying, well, given our alliance with the USA, if the USA did know, with our basic intelligence structures, were we aware, that's the crucial point, were we aware of the technology that they were supposedly de-engineering down in this southern Thule Island hence the Falklands War. Because if we didn't know about it, then that means the Falklands War was for the reasons that we said it about. If they did know, it seems that we wanted a taste of that technology, and hence we ended up going down to that part for that reason, which puts a whole new sheen on the Falklands War. South Georgia was the declaration of war when, if you look into South Georgia, it was actually to do with some civilian businessmen going to take scrap iron off South Georgia from a whaling station, and then we used that to declare war. Essentially, when you look at the start and the end of the war, bizarrely, from what we hear about the Falklands, so 1976 this base gets built on Thule, and as you'll see, the war ends with base on Thule as well. So that's the important point. They're de-engineering this substance. Interestingly, on an evidential level as well, we mentioned the National Archives in July finding about the men in little green ponchos. I spent days and days going through the National Archives on the computer, ready to order. What I was after was the treaty agreements between Britain and Argentina for the end of the Falklands War. And there's numerous of these documents. If you go and search on these, absolutely numerous. You can see the number there for each of these. There's literally numerous ones of these. One that I tried to order that was so big, they wanted £353 just to print it out and send it to me. The most interesting one I came across, I could get a copy of every Falkland Islands thing that I came across. I was allowed to order a copy of it. You can't see because I cut the slide off here accidentally. This FC07-337, this one you can't see it there, but it deals with the specifics of the South Sandwich Islands, between the treaty between Argentina and the UK, dealing with the South Sandwich Islands and Southern Thule, basically the very area that we're talking about. When I tried to click to order this and to get more information, this is the one file that was closed for 40 years, so you can't actually get a hold of this file. Unlike
That's strange, isn't it?
All other Falklands files you can order. Why did they close one file to do with a treaty to do with the very island where this is going on, when all the other treaties, if you want to go and get the treaty on what happened on South Georgia or Port Stanley, you can get the treaty for it. You can get every other detail. Anyway, this is Carlos, who in 1980 was lieutenant scientific officer, worked at the base that I've just shown you about on Thule, and he worked above ground. So I've been corresponding for a good year or two. Really nice guy. A little bit about what provisioning, what was going on about the base, little bits of scientific interaction, the various experiments that are going on there. It seemed to me that he was too much aware about anything more major going on there, which says something in itself. What he did notice were the flights over in 1981 before the war started, to do with sending helicopters that were observing. It's a nice view. The base, as you can see, is in the background there, and you can see, I mean, a beautiful area, but obviously very inhospitable.
So do you have, just going back to the sinking of the Belgrano, have you any ideas why Margaret Thatcher would order the sinking of something like that with the loss of such life when it's already way outside the 200 exclusion mile area, and also on its way from it, not to it?
No, and that's a really interesting point that you bring up, because of course there was that famous TV debate with where Mrs Thatcher agreed to go on between that and I think a peace activist, a very articulate elderly peace activist, who really gave a good going over the sinking of the Belgrano. And Mrs Thatcher got very flustered over this, and the lady kept pushing and pushing. And for those that remember it, it really was on the front page of the news the next day. But at the end, after Thatcher got so flustered, she ended up saying, "Look, you can keep pushing me on this. I can't tell you. One day you'll find out why we had to do what we had to do." In other words, sink that ship that, as you rightly say, was going outside of
one day. Yeah,
well, that was the words. Someone told me this after the conference when I gave the talk, and then sent me the footage, and this indeed was what took place. She did actually say that. I mean, that's
a bizarre thing to say.
Well, what other reason would she have to say that one day you'll find out? It's like, if you want to find out a bit more about his experiences with these blue ETs, then that's the guy that I'm sort of indebted to for starting off this whole research. That's Alec Newell's 2 books called Co-Evolution, and a fascinating read it is too. So that's his website at the top, where he does a blog occasionally. Okay. So what happens at the end of the war, as I say, it's unknown to most people. The war started with this Southern Thule when the base was built in 1976, and it actually ended, strangely enough. You didn't hear any of this in the press, nothing at all. What then happened 2 weeks after the apparent surrender, so the surrender of the main Falklands War, all the celebration, all that stuff about the flag going up over Port Stanley. Well, actually what you'll find out is that we then gathered a series, I've got the list of ships here, we actually sent in the Royal Marines and the SAS went in and did the underground base. So we hear...
So what do you mean they did the underground base?
Whilst the war finished, and we basically, it's very strange the way you think, well, we're going to now concentrate on this tiny little island that's just got this tiny little weather station base on. Well, why on earth would they need to send, and I quote, Operation Keyhole. Interestingly, the whole name, the code name, the military code name for the Falklands was Operation Corporate, which again comes back to the point that the ET said this war is more about... it's not so much about politics, it's about business. Isn't it interesting that the name for the Falklands was Operation Corporate? Well, isn't it also interesting that the very final, just to take over this tiny little so-called weather station, the operation given to that little escapade was called Operation Keyhole. I don't know where they get these names from. But they sent the frigate HMS Yarmouth, full-on fighting ship, ice patrol vessel HMS Endurance, a supply ship Oleander, and a rescue tug called the Salvageman, together with a squadron of Royal Marines. These were all sent to surround this tiny little island of southern Thule. You've got to ask yourself, why send, at the end of the war, such a big expedition for a tiny island when they know full well there are 10, 18 soldiers on board this. You'll actually see what happens. So this is some very rare footage of... The base was called Corbeta, Uruguay. This was the name given to the base on there. And what you see in here is actually Royal Marines. From what we know, the SAS and the Special Boat Squadron, and I do know that they went in because I found that in a couple of books that they did send the SAS and the Special Boat Squadron to this island, but in the official records you won't find any mention of that. But it seems to me the Royal Marines went to do the main base on top, and the SAS and SBS seem to have gone in on 2 different occasions and gone and found this other alien base.
Which may okay. So I was going to say, which makes no sense with the official story, but with your story, absolutely begins to make sense.
Didn't mention why would they send SAS in, just do a very small base. It would make it look really stupid. So none of that was mentioned. But in some books, you'll find that yes, special services were sent to do Operation Keyhole. So here is it's 2 minutes long. Here's the music underneath is just Argentinian music. This is a mixture of footage taken by people on the base, the scientists, and also some news footage. So that's the base. My guess is that this was taken by Royal Marines. So here are the Royal Marines. You know, fair few of them. There they are on the base that you've seen pictures of. And the base was taken without a shot being fired, so...
There's nothing there.
Well, yeah, nothing,
Or is it me? Am I missing something?
Well, exactly, that's the point. That was the treaty signed for this thing. Look at the extent of explosives they use on this little base. Wait a minute, I mean...
I wonder if this is a Phil Schneider event.
No, could well be. Here.
Look, wow! Oh my God!
I mean, that's some C5 explosives, and this is what's left of the base after.
I mean, sorry.
I think they were making a statement. I don't know. I'm still confused about why they had to do that. If that was a science base, something going on there with. I
really had no idea. Never thought about anything like this before. But
none of this got into our head. It wouldn't do. As a tiny little island, it would have made us look rather foolish after this gallant war that we fought. And then suddenly that we went and blew this supposed tiny science base upon this remote island. It was just bizarre. So, whether this serves as a distraction, but there's how they left. Interestingly, some Argentinians snuck back. After the British flag went up, they went and put the Argentinian flag back up. So I think there was another revisit to then blow the rest of it up. I think some other task force went and did that again. I thought that was quite amusing in its way. Essentially now, this oil substance, apparently when they raided the base, the special services found a certain amount of technology that got taken, whatever that was, all the usual stuff that they probably find when advanced intelligences are operating on this planet. They also found samples of this black oil nanosubstance. Then, through a series of events, we find that it gets back to a certain company called Marconi. Now, when I gave this talk, someone said, how do you know that this got back there? Well, there's several reasons, which we'll find as we go along. One of which was that Alec Newells, the contactee who knew these Blue ET group, because of his story and because he got put in jail once for a series of things that related to his car coming back with some very strange adaptations to it that got traced back to Jaguar in Britain, and Jaguar in Britain sent the Royal Institute of Affairs, RIAA, very famous Chatham House, apparently top ranking people as far as the ET issue, and I've got a picture that's not included here of RIA, Chatham House people, Thatcher, Reagan, everyone together. So this is the upper ranking of people that deal with world affairs. And
so we're sent to interview Alec
they were sent to Alec Newell, turned up at his door and said, why has your car got an advanced fuel system that mirrors it has gone backwards? You see, he'd been taken to a parallel universe and his car had been taken there on this ship, and his car came back. The idea was that as he went back and got put back on his planet into this other dimension, it all goes with their universe is in parallel to ours. This is the idea that he's been told. So they traced him from this. His car went in for servicing, and the next thing you knew, a few weeks later, then they'd obviously sent it back to Jaguar, and Jaguar had informed someone that this very weird circuit board inside his engine management system was unlike anything they'd seen. So that's another side story. So he was then got in touch while he was in jail over this, refusing to pass information on to them about these ET contacts. He got jailed for that and other
that's
reasons.
right, isn't it? Because he refused to answer their questions about his ET events.
There are many things they were saying. We want to know what's happened with this. There was something to do with another crash. They wanted to identify some aspects of it. He refused to do it. He wouldn't cooperate at all, and he was put into a jail in New Zealand for quite some time actually. And anyway, at that point, he then meets a guy, gets in touch with him from South African intelligence, who we know that the South African intelligence are very much linked to the British. Also far more involved on world affairs than I think many people realise. Very efficient, and he basically says that the British that struck gold down in the Falklands, that this stuff was taken.
This is the South African intelligence guy.
Told him. Said that this thing was taken to Marconi. You don't even need to know that, because then if you then trace what happens after, then a lot of things start to make sense. I was just making some points here, linking them. Marconi at the time were way ahead. They're a British company under a General Electric. I got it wrong in a talk I gave. I thought the GE were an American company, but apparently GEC are a British company. The General Electric company were our umbrella company. So the whole thing is a British-owned company, along with Plessy, who you'll see next, based in Chelmsford in the UK. They've been around, obviously they were around since the days of the wireless. Quote a bit later on that says that they got some amazing inventions from this fluid, but it also caused significant problems. There is some scientific research on this substance, and it's called Augie, AUGIE, and it's similar to gold. It's got some gold structure, and apparently it can morph into anything within its chemical makeup. Now I don't know what that is. I don't know what its chemical formula is. All I know is that AU is linked to gold, and apparently they've found out that is the case. I don't know much more than that. It is sentient, and it does seem to be able to morph into certain things and have a life of its own, which is where the danger. It also can interface with obviously computers, which is where we come to the next bit. Plessy was another company that you'll find involved in these. The next pattern that I'm about to show you. Plessy, another high-tech company, and the interesting part. But remember the dates for this. The dates are really important, because when these Marconi deaths that I'm talking about came about, no one really realised why all of a sudden did these sort of things start happening.
We haven't actually mentioned that just to this point, David. So we're talking about how Marconi was the recipient, search I assume, of this black sentient material, along with Plessy. And from that then down, I don't know when the years are, you'll tell us, there were many numbers of deaths of scientists there, and that's what you're just talking about. Yeah.
Basically, if you imagine, my take that I was talking about with Grant Cameron before is that America's got a whole, since 1947, the national security state, America's got a whole infrastructure based on its readiness to accept alien artifacts and alien knowledge, and even ETs themselves. They've just got that built in. They've got the infrastructure, they've got the power, they've got the finance to do it. I think Britain in the early 80s wasn't ready for what was about to happen to them, and they tried to keep some of this for themselves. They found it in what they counted as their war, and they tried to deal with it to get a technological advantage, and it bounced back on them. And you'll see in a minute. What's interesting, I found, is that GC Marconi became its most powerful and turned into one of the major defence and satellite communication companies when they merged with Plessy, but this advantage came and they merged in 1986. So that's just a guess of mine, but it started, just realised magical nanofluid came back in 1982. it's imagining this whole year of the 80s as some sort of year where a lot of things started happening underneath. This guy who wrote this book got constantly diverted off when he tried to ask the military about what was going on with Marconi and what we're about to discuss next.
And that book, is called Open Verdict by Tony Collins.
Tony Collins wrote this book, published in 1991. Basically, he was editor of Computer Weekly, and he kept getting certain deaths from people in Marconi turn up on his desk because he was editor of Computer Weekly, and he was amazed that no other newspaper was actually around. He kept getting pushed to this thing called Operation Ptarmigan, and it's based on the name of a bird, but the British were way ahead in what was then mobile communications. So it's about having a mobile phone inside a tank that was encrypted, so you carried your own mobile system with you that couldn't be encrypted. Something to do with communications he kept getting linked to there. So I knew Siemens had got the technology that Marconi had revolutionised. The two most powerful electronics companies in Britain at the time, certainly even worldwide, then merged and became this conglomerate. Anyway, okay, so we're on to the points here that sort of follows on from all this. So you have this bizarre substance that comes from the booty of war, and there's British papers covered this, and all these deaths started happening in the IT sector, defence sector, etc.
So if I can just read out some of those headlines from the Los Angeles Times, it says, their firm linked to Star Wars, British scientists' deaths, suicides or conspiracy. And ComputerWeekly.com, mysterious deaths, freedom of information, Marconi and the Ministry of Defence. And the Chicago Tribune News says scientists' deaths mystify the British. And
there was, I could have got loads more British cuttings for that, but they're very hard to, obviously this was the 80s, they were quite difficult to find on the internet, but this did obviously enter the British papers, and no one made the links for a little bit later on. It took a bit of time because of course the MOD kept putting out, this is defence industry, everyone gets stressed, this is what happens. But someone worked out the amount of deaths compared to every other defence industry in other areas, and it was huge. But essentially, if you look at the patterns of these deaths that took place, these were all people working on Marconi. You can see there's people, Lieutenant Colonel Anthony McCoy, defence experts, Royal College of Military Science. A lot of these are hard to read. Obviously, down the side, you'll see their method of death, or suicide, which is what they're always called. This is why the book's called Open Verdict, because believe me, every police force seemed to bow down and make everything a suicide, even though they were absolutely bizarre.
There's one there, I just have to look at that one, it's called Decapitation.
That was the one I was going to mention. Poor guy. That's
26-year-old.
A 26-year-old, very young programmer. Well, if you want to think about how would a young 24-year-old programmer, quite optimistic in his life, I think he was about to get married at that point.
He cut off his own head. How do you do that?
Well, how do you do that? His method of death, essentially, allegedly, tied one rope round his neck. He then also ties the other end of a rope to a tree, I think it was, or a lamppost. Obviously, he did a nice tight knot, got into his car, wound down the window with it still attached, and then pressed his accelerator to the floor, picked up speed, and pulled his head off.
Well, a nice way to go.
Yeah, a nice way to go, and just a very strange, strange way of all these suicides when there are many other ways. Far less pain and far less trauma. Decapitation, suffocation, asphyxiation. When you go into some of these, they are bizarre. A family man found by son and daughters who'd gone into his garden shed and had put electric wires over himself and electrocuted himself. These other young Asian programmers jumped off the Bristol suspension bridge. When they found the body, it had a puncture mark in one of his buttocks. This goes on and on. But the point, anyway, you can go and look these up for yourself. The lists are on the internet. The point I want to make, given the issue we said about the Falklands, are the dates here. So we have March 82, April 83, March 1985. Yeah,
November 85, August 86. Gosh, they're all like almost within 6 months of each other.
Notice how they build up for the 86s. So August 86, October 86, January 87, January 87. So we have this crescendo of them starting to build up, and it's not finished yet.
3 in February 87.
Yeah.
And we've got March 87, April, 3 in April. One in May, one in June. This is
87.
and they all work. Are they all in the same department? Are they all what?
These are all linked to, but they're either on lease sort of from the MOD to Marconi, but they all are linked to Marconi projects, and they all work in certain
communications.
Yeah, so we're not finished yet. So we come on to the third page, and
1988.
88.
I meant sorry. August 88 and September 88. Good Lord.
Okay, so that's 22. I mean, someone counted 25, I think, but these are the main ones that.
So asphyxiation seems to be quite a popular one, and so does electrocution. Those are favourites.
Electrocution, asphyxiation. What were a few of those ones?
Death leap. I've seen one or two different.
Yeah. Here's another one that comes to mind. An auto accident where a totally married guy, totally happy, happened to drive into a wall at 70 miles an hour, and silly old him, he'd got six canisters of gas in his boot, and of course they blew up. Don't know why a computer engineer, I forgot what his actual work was, would need 6 canisters of propane in his boot, but of course, and I think he escaped from that, but then
they got him afterwards.
Yeah, he went again then. Anyway, now what's interesting about all these is the dates, because these then basically stop, so you've got this sort of life of what I think is a project that's going on.
It sounds like it, doesn't it?
Yeah. The other thing I noticed is that you have at the start I went and researched some of the early people to die, and they both brought in a expert from Essex University, one of the foremost early computer programmers, had basically learned how to create hospital records before anyone else. Professor at Essex University, he was one of the first to be brought into the project. So this army guy from the science college, 49, he was brought in, and it made sense to me. If you're a project, you're a military guy, you're setting up a project, you bring in 2 senior people, especially a computer programmer, you say, right, we've got this stuff, we need to what to do it. You then employ the junior programmers. You have to bring in people that know a lot about new stuff like computers. So we have then the deaths of these two, got the whole details of their death in this death dossier here, which is quite long. I've got the details of the 2 Asian guys' deaths, and they're both extremely happy guys, and they were experts in Fortran, a programming language. They also both seem to be in the realm of computer simulations. Others were expert in satellite communications. There's a sort of remit that certain of them were part of, mostly to do with computers and simulations. This seems to be a big part of the project. So part of my analysis, having done that and read Tony Collins's book,
read one thing before you go on, the suffocation one. Richard Pugh, computer consultant for the Ministry of Defence, he was found dead, wrapped head to toe in rope that was tied 4 times around his neck, and the coroner listed his death as an accident to a sexual experiment gone awry.
Yeah. Believe me, it's like
rope all around your body, and
it's like a Phil Schneider. The bizarre thing comes to when these things go to inquest, because obviously at certain points you can't control everyone. So certain coroners are going, no, this is bizarre. The 2 Asian guys who ended up killing themselves ended up going all the way to Bristol. Now, during this time in Bristol, no one could account for 2 days of where they were. 2, 3 or 4 of these people had missing time events. So some of the conclusions you could probably come to is that maybe they were so bizarre, maybe these weren't physically our security services killing these people, but it seems to me, and there was suggestions with another person that came forward called Joe Vialis, he was a very famous researcher, Joe Vials, I think I pronounced his name wrongly. Anyway, he was working in the oil industry, but knew a bit and was commenting a bit about these theses. He's also dead, of course. The just went missing, didn't turn up, so he had everything to live for, didn't turn up, went missing, still missing to this day. All this stuff with missing time hints at the fact that I think that it wasn't necessarily that these were being all carried out by, some of them were, by our intelligence agents or whoever, that some of this may have been some remote influencing technology of some sort that these people to go and kill themselves. The scenario that I think came around is that when Marconi received these things, because like I said, they didn't have this infrastructure like the Americans had for dealing with these things. If you saw Dan Sherman talk at the last Exopolitics event, he was only part of quite a small it was an ET communication thing that he had to do through a computer using his mind. But he went through the whole system of how they have these grey projects that are then surrounded by black projects. Absolutely amazing the way that they said it came to the mid to late 70s and the UFO public has started to guess how they were operating and could get too far into these projects. So they devised, it wasn't before that, he claimed it was in the mid to late 70s, this onion thing. Sounds very obvious, but the complexity of which of hiding these grey projects.
Like the Russian doll thing.
Yeah, Russian doll thing.
Yeah.
So you have your alien project surrounded by a black project, and then you have a normal project around that. Well, I don't think the British had this sort of stuff. I think they were good at it because we, in the war we taught the Americans a lot and stuff. I think we didn't know what was happening, and we didn't know how to deal with this stuff when it turned up. And so what happened was you had to then pull people in from that weren't normally conditioned to the military.
Yeah.
Went and got programmers from abroad in India. And
well, also at that time we're not as far down, as we are now in 2012 for programming and all the rest of that.
Near.
It was an entirely different era. It's like a different age, wasn't it?
And if they got a hint, say if the SS had raided this base and they'd seen that these samples of oil were perhaps rigged up to some sort of fibre optics, whatever they used, what the ETs had used, they must have got an idea somehow that this stuff could be interfaced with. They knew enough about it. I don't think they knew entirely what they had on their hands, but they knew enough about it that it could be interfaced with. So they bring in these computer programmers. I think as part of this, two problems happened. A, they had to read them into the project, but at a level that they wouldn't normally do. In other words, they had to sort of say, well, look, where's it? Had to brief them and basically say that this stuff has come off planet. Now, to a very conservative young computer programmer, that could be quite unnerving, to a degree. I think on top of that, what seems to have happened, as we'll see from a quote in a minute, is one of these scientists found out that this stuff could be switched on in a certain way, and also certain things seem to start happening, that they had these nanobots made up. When I suppose when you look at them under a microscope, or when this stuff starts to morph and operate, then things start moving, and things start getting a little bit scary.
So whatever the sentient stuff is off planet, or is it within the Earth? Is it sort of a natural functioning of the Earth's evolution reached a certain stage and now it's being triggered into a new level of development?
It seems to either have been this is all conjecture. I think it was put here by whoever made this planet and put us on it as a safety device for if we fucked up, and if we screwed up as a race and created all hell, then this stuff would rewrite the planet. If you watch the Prometheus film, that's essentially what was going to go on. Stuff would genetically rewire and rewrite the planet in a terraforming way. While I was talking to Alec Newald, he mentioned the South African guy was working, the South African intelligence agency worked and educated with a guy called Victor Moore. Lo and behold, who do I find in here? The Book of the Dead Scientist, but Victor Moore, design engineer for Marconi Space Systems, found dead of an overdose. Now, his wife claims she thinks it was a suicide, but something about his work had made him very uneasy, and she saw a total change in him overnight.
Really?
So there's one that probably was a suicide, but it's again a guy that was happy in his work up till then, but was asked to then join a new project. All this jigsaw fits together. Here's the other quote. Mr. X is the guy, the South African intelligence agent. He's now dead. He was quite an elderly guy, but had worked on a lot of these projects. Also been to Antarctica. I can't see from this angle. These quotes are
so he's just saying the British struck gold in the early 1980s, and it says, my contact in South Africa even knew one of the Marconi guys, as he had studied in the UK with him years before, in brackets Victor Moore. He was the one that noticed when the oil was switched on, they started to get interference with their weather satellites. How interesting is that?
That's crucial. That bit's crucial.
Very so, and that's from Alex Newald, Personal Communication 2011. This friend let slip one day about a new robotic fluid their computer and engineer guys were working with that could be programmed with radio frequencies. They thought they might be able to use it hydraulically, which would open up all kinds of new design fields. When he asked around, nobody knew who invented it or where it might have come from, nor even any talk of patents to buy from another company.
Yeah.
Co-evolution. That's Alec Newald again, 2010.
Yeah.
That's really interesting, David. I mean, my God.
Yeah. Again,
startling.
Well, and Alec Newell, one of his hints to me was to say, go and look, you'll find that Marconi probably opened a new hydraulics division around about that time. And I disagreed with that because I don't think this fluid is hydraulic in the way that we don't put it into gadgets to make them lubricate and do things and do what hydraulics do. So I think he was thinking along different lines to that. So I totally agree, and I thought that at the time he told me that. I was going to make a point that Tony Collins came to the conclusion in his book that these deaths, obviously he looked into it in depth, these deaths were basically all to do with either stress, or mostly he put them down to Cold War spy killings. They were just inconclusive. Again, it was the 80s again, he was researching this in the 80s, the Cold War, as we just discussed, was still raging at that point.
David, it's getting more and more interesting, I can't wait.
See the ETN interview with lifelong experiencer Hilary Porter, who worked at Marconi and was there when there was a breach of security, when the top secret area had been compromised. This involved ET. Further, Hilary's ex-husband was working with telemetry when the missile launch mission the Australians were about to execute suddenly reported a craft landing and witnessed 2 occupants alight. Surprisingly, the scheduled rocket launch did not proceed, and you can see the 2 interviews with Hilary.
Expose on the Falklands War and the ET element to that. We're here with David Griffin, who's going to take us, again, we're going to have a look at the Marconi death. So David, we're going to pick it up from here. Please introduce us to this concept of the Marconi deaths. I've read about them in years before, but I hadn't connected to this issue.
I actually have the first Marconi deaths dossier here, which as you can see is quite thick and contains a few gruesome details about just a few of the cases of the Marconi scientists, all in defence industry, that died. And as we've, I think, briefly mentioned, Tony Collins' book that went into details, and as editor of Computer Weekly, he then wrote a book in 1991, published in 1991, researched throughout the 80s to do with these deaths. So a lot of stuff out there, and what's interesting is no one's actually did all this stuff together. That it's been this whole thing. Oh, why did Marconi, this company, suddenly have all these deaths happen? Really gruesome, overt ways. Nothing hidden.
And in a short space of time as well.
Very short space, and we'll get to see that in a minute. So the main point I wanted to make is the fact that Marconi, of course, is a British company and was started off by GEC, which I thought actually was the American company, but GEC is General Electric's company from Britain. So as you can see, they have several offices all over the place. I've taken this from Wikipedia, basically company history. Chelmsford in Essex. They even obviously started off building radios. They gave Britain the main thing for building these crystal radio sets. I think that's the right word. And interestingly, from then on became very much part of early satellite development and electronic warfare, all sorts of things. They were our main defence industry go-to company. So the point I'm going to make, and the theory that is backed up significantly by a fair bit of evidence, is that this rather strange nano oil substance that the SAS, the Special Forces, went and raided on the Thule Island, while the Marines went in over the top and dealt with the top base that we've seen the footage of, came back. And of course, where would you take something like that if you were British? You didn't want to perhaps give it straight to the Americans, take it to Marconi, and something went a little bit wrong when they gave it to Marconi, as we'll see. So this is just a quick history, a few slides from regarding Marconi. So Marconi, there, one of the main companies. All these in the deaths dossier here, every single one of these 22 individuals were all linked either with the MOD and working with at least sort of to Marconi, or they were basically working for Marconi itself.
And what's interesting also, David, is I've noticed that, of course, this is to do very much involved with the Star Wars, with the Reagan and Thatcher administrations.
Indeed, and Tony Collins' main focus of his book, one of his main focuses, apart from old-style Cold War deaths, was for actually the Star Wars DI initiative. And actually, when I looked into that, then the Star Wars thing didn't actually start getting kicked off until sort of late '83. So, of course, we're coming back in '82, and as you'll see, these very strange strange deaths start a bit before that. So I think perhaps Star Wars was linked into it in some way.
It's not far distant away, though, is it? A few months, really.
And there is an angle on the whole Star Wars thing. But the other company which comes up and gets mentioned is Plessey, another high-tech company, and way ahead in electronic warfare communications. You know, really cutting edge. They got taken over by Siemens, basically got their technology. Interestingly, when Tony Collins was doing his research, he kept getting sidetracked by the MOD, going, yes, you're looking to these deaths are all to do with Army mobile communications. Plessey and Marconi had breakthrough mobile phone technology in the way that they could put inside a tank a mobile phone unit that had its own encryption service. So you essentially carried around a whole radar mast, and the old circuitry where mobile phone encrypted. And they lent those mobile phone systems out to the very early people, DC, who all the names of the Motorola, and these companies didn't want to give back the prototypes. It worked so well. And that was called Operation PTARGIM, Ptamergin. I'm pronouncing that wrongly, but it's a bird anyway if you look it up. But Collins kept getting told it was to do with this, but that technology was way too old, I think, for what happened. The interesting point I found out is that when they became the main high-tech defense communication company with complete leading expertise in the world in education, was when they merged, and Marconi and Plessey merged under GEC in 1986. There's a quote I've got where they claim that it's done amazing things in biological medicine, communications. So they've obviously got hold of this stuff. They've got a good mind of this stuff. They found out how to do stuff. So it's no wonder then that these. I mean, the issue I have is that you're trying to be slightly objective. You're dealing with the fact that they call this thing an oil, but that's just their description of a sort of viscous black liquid. The interesting thing that comes in with the point you made about energy and transmission is that this stuff seems to, and there's more evidence to come yet, that this stuff seems to transmit. It both transmits and receives and seems to operate on certain frequencies. So, it may well be that part of its morphing power that we keep hearing about, the fact that this stuff can morph into certain things. We don't know what we do. We'll find out a bit what happened in the Gulf in a bit. But it may well, the morphing may involve morphing some sort of transmission signal. I don't know.
I think we should just pick up here about the Marconi-Plessey amalgamation, the acquisition there. And David, as you said, it's two leading British high-tech firms of the 20th century, and joined under one giant parent company, GEC, to create Marconi Communications in 1986. So maybe they had to come together to be able to accommodate
totally possible
exactly such a project to do with this sentient fluidic.
No, you're right, and there's a wider point I'm trying to make here, and again, it's all guesswork really on one level. But as you start putting these little mosaic points together, then you build a wider picture that starts to become a bit too good to be true. So again, why all of a sudden do you get the two major cutting-edge UK electronics and counter-espionage, electronic surveillance, satellite, all in their own way in Britain, merging in 1986? That's possibly 4 years after this strange nanosubstance got brought back. So that was just another point that these two leading companies merged at that point. So it's what was going on at Marconi at that point. We were at this era, this crossover between sort of older analogues technology, this new digital age, but then along comes something that may be even way more advanced just at this sort of time when we're having this crossover. And so the whole issue is when we come to look at these employees that we find that were working for Marconi, all specialists in the very early areas of how to create simulations for communications. This is what it mostly seems to be about. They were experts in creating computer simulations for communications between satellites, or what we think were satellites, simulations for various other areas, electronic warfare. Actually, it's computer-based, as well as employing sort of general managers who in the computers, and army people very high up in the army who were also linked to the Army Science Command and things like that. So,
some newspaper headlines here, and if we look at the Chicago Tribune, the news, the scientists' deaths mystify the British. And the Los Angeles Times says, their firm linked to Star Wars. British scientists, death, suicides, or conspiracy. Well, ComputerWeekly.com says mysterious deaths Freedom of Information, Marconi and the Ministry of Defence. So clearly it's being picked up. The jungle drums are going.
It was picked up and there was the British press were covering this. I just couldn't find it at the last minute for putting these slides together, but the British press picked up on it. Again, back to Tony Collins, in his position as editor of Computer Weekly at that time, the reason he he came across and thought, why is no one writing about these? And it's because he became this central point for all of these reports. Because they were all computer-based people, he became this central point for all these deaths. They kept arriving on his desk, and he was like, well, no one's looking into these. Why is no one looking into these sudden deaths that are coming? So he began compiling these dossiers, which ended up as this book that he wrote. So it did get huge amounts of attention at the time, and actually in came the sort of MOD line. Even, some of these people were American. I remember him saying that the American embassy had said, we've had these deaths listed even longer than you've had them listed, and we can't find a reason why they're happening. Who knows? Don't forget, this is in an area which not a lot of people knew about.
So this is amazing that it's now you're tying it up, David.
And this is where it gets quite astonishing, because of course we've got here on these slides that you'll have to read out. The patterns I want to draw people on is, again, remember when the Falklands War finished and when this base was raided by these special services, and supposedly, according to the evidence that you'll see a little bit later, that this stuff got brought back to Marconi. Well, as war finishes in 82, and if you start looking at these patterns of deaths there down the side, you'll see these causes of death. These were all, as he calls in his book, open verdict, because most of them were open, but they were all classed as suicides, and yet you can see these very strange causes of death.
So if we just look at some of the timings of there. An auto accident in March 82, a missing person in April 83, and March 1985, a shotgun blast, a death leap in November 1985, another death leap in August 1986, decapitation 1986, suffocation 1987, that's January, and again January 1987, and asphyxiation. How on earth can a decapitation be suicide, David? I mean...
Well, I'll tell you about one of the decapitations. I think that was... I don't know if the camera will pick those up. There's two young programmers that you'll see there. I think...
Well, he was only 26. Ashad Shah, or Ashid Shah.
You've got the two young Asian programmers there and there. The two, both, one's 24 and one's 26 or something. And really young and brought in quite early. The bizarre case of the one Asian guy, his decapitation was completely bizarre. He actually tied a rope around his neck. He then tied the other end of a rope around a tree, I think it was. He then climbed into his car, wound down the window, so the rope and the tree obviously and his neck are all linked, and then apparently put his foot to the floor of the car, and then it decapitated himself. Also, when you look into the backgrounds of these guys, these were mild-mannered. This was early computer programmers. These were quite nerdy gentle types, very much into their coding and computer, and you can't imagine them making going to want to go. This guy was actually due to be married soon. Very, very, very happy. Decided to kill himself like that. From my memory, he leaped from the Bristol suspension bridge. It's interesting. Neither of these two. They both ended up in Bristol, but neither of these two came from Bristol. He leaped from the Bristol suspension bridge, but when the coroner did the investigation, they found a puncture mark in his buttock. For several people, including one of these family men that I've forgotten the name of, who totally unlike him went missing. There was perhaps some technology involved. It's because in the case of the two Asian guys that went to Bristol, the coroner's report couldn't account for the 2 days of, they disappeared for 2 days and no one knew where they went. And again, totally unlike them. What made them both disappear for 2 days, both go to Bristol? So I don't know. We'll see now as these deaths go on. The dates again, it's important to note the dates because... February
1987, and another one in February 1987, that's a drug overdose and an asphyxiation. Another asphyxiation in 1987, an auto accident in March 1987, another auto accident in April 1987, another auto accident in April 1987, suffocation in April 1987, good Lord, auto accident May 1987, and in June a heart attack.
Yeah, and again the 1, 2, 3, the bottom two again for Plessy Industries, electronic weapons engineering, Plessy
Defence
Industries.
Systems.
The one above, digital communications expert for Plessy Defence Industries. The other guy, and software engineer for Ministry of Defence. This was all linked up. We still haven't finished yet. There's another page.
January 1988, March 88, and those are death leap and asphyxiation. electrocution in August 1988, again electrocution in 1988 in August, and asphyxiation in September 1988. So those are 22 deaths linked to the Marconi Plessy Defence Complex between the Falklands War 1982 and 1988.
Yeah, and
that's extraordinary.
I challenge. I said, you find me another industry that can mirror those sort of deaths figures in that short space of time. I don't think one existed. Someone did work out the statistics that even in something like the defence industry, that's where it's high stress and all this, that you'd have. The point I want to make with the date is like, well, what, you know, imagine you've got to put yourself in the hands of the British military, who brought back this strange nano oil substance that they got from these ETs. If they turn up and they perhaps don't quite know what to do with it, they of course think, right, we'll hand it over to Marconi, cutting edge needs. Then if you think that this stuff is so absolutely so weird and a little bit way out as we think it is, you know, I don't think nanotechnology had been heard of in the 80s. Probably been heard of, but certainly.
And when you're saying nanotechnology, you talk about sentient nanotechnology.
Nanotechnology, which essentially means that deep down at the atomic levels, you have sentient machines that work together and can, you know, we now have nano things going in clear arteries. The thing is, if this thing is what we think it's for, which is there to essentially perhaps terraform a planet, which is that we're coming to with this sort of stuff, then it's probably going to be way ahead of anything we think of about nanotechnology.
I'm just going to make reference here, and it is a bit of a sidebar, but on some of the physical implants that have been removed from some of these contactees or abductees, they've had neurons. The reason that there has not been any inflammatory response to these implants has been because the neurological material has enmeshed with their own neurological systems. And also, when it's been removed, often it has intelligently changed. Yeah. And also, when it has gone to be removed, like Whitley Strieber, for
it ran away, didn't it?
It shifted, it moved. So there is intelligence, and that may be, you know, a sidebar, but it has a relevance. It has a correlation.
Yep, I think that totally links into this stuff. They see, you know, the whole thing we hear about ETs is their ships are sentient and they're linked to their consciousness. So,
and David Adair was talking about that. Absolutely, that reflected his emotions.
So yeah, that's the point I wanted to make. If you spot the pattern there, especially if you look at these deaths that accelerated in why in the midpoint of this whole thing, when we've got this, you know, especially it's during the Thatcher and Reagan era, after the Falklands War, you have this. Interestingly, at the start, you have two really important elderly, I think were project managers brought in right at the start of 1982. One was a computer expert, so I've been and done his history from Essex University. He got brought in, Keith Bowden. And then there was another guy from the Royal Military College that also got brought in, and he was 49, Anthony Goddard, I think his name was. So you can imagine if you were setting up this sort of project to deal with this very strange alien artifact, you'd bring two people in, you know, one from inside, one from outside, from the academic world, and then they'd create a group where they then perhaps, we need these new cutting-edge programmers, so they bring in the two Asian young programmers who are perhaps whiz-kids with Fortran, which is a programming language that they were apparently very big on with the MOD at that time. So there's a sort of pattern existing, but what you have to do in that case, if you then presented someone that you needed a computer to simulate or to interface with a strange oil-like substance that perhaps started doing strange things.
Well, it's to communicate, isn't it? That's it. I mean, really, that's what we're doing.
But what would you, to a point, if this stuff was so far out of our consensus reality tunnel, you'd have to disclose a certain amount of stuff, both to the older staff, project managers. You'd have to give them a good oversight about, well, look, we've got this stuff. Well, what is it? I've never seen anything like it. Where are the patents? They would also need some of that. And if that was that freaky to them, or that outside their sort of reality of what they're prepared to, you might start running into problems where they panic or start telling people or just say, no, I'm not doing it. But by that time you've disclosed. So I think...
well, I mean, I agree. It could cause psychological problems, but I'm sure they would have been profiled before they went in.
You see, I disagree, and this is why I said that I had this discussion with Grant Cameron about, he's saying, look, perhaps it's as many as only, you know, there could be as many as 3 people in the UK that are fully briefed on the ET and UFO phenomenon. And I think he was dead right, because if you look at the case of sort of Dan Sherman, he was only in a pretty minor project that involved intuitive communications with an ET via a computer and involved training his mind. He had to go through these huge procedures, and he basically gave there's an interesting chapter in his book where he basically says that the UFO community in the mid to late 1970s were started to make inroads into their projects and it was starting to become a bit of a pain to the US military, because the UFO community is starting to get to know a bit too much about how they function. So in the end of the 70s, they developed this thing, a cliche title called The Onion, and pretty simple in how they do it. That the alien projects are called grey projects, and you wrap a grey project in a black project. Well, of course, we know about black projects. They're highly classified anyway. Most
the old
base,
Russian doll situation.
yeah, Russian doll situation. The metaphor where sometimes even base commanders don't know that black projects are going on in their own base. This is apparently how they work. So then the grey project that's then inside that, and then of course outside the black project you have a normal functioning day-to-day project. So apparently that was then brought in. I don't think in Britain that we had anything like that, and I think that the Americans were very good at it. They'd had Roswell, they'd had the 1947 National Security State, so they'd had themselves prepared for this sort of stuff. I think us Brits, thinking that we ruled the world, hadn't quite got the military infrastructure there to deal with this sort of thing, and this is borne out by a few of these quotes we'll see a bit later.
So this is another strange Marconi death. Victor Moore, aged 46, a design engineer for Marconi Space Systems. And in February 1987, Moore was found dead of a drug overdose, and his death was also listed as a suicide.
Yeah. What's interesting about Victor Moore is I had found him in this book as listed, only very brief mention of Victor Moore in this book. His wife actually claims that out of all the other 22, that she thinks his was a suicide, but the point is, it's still interesting because she claims that he was offered a new contract at work and he wasn't happy with it, and the more that this went on with this new contract, or desperate he came, he tried to leave, he tried to enter another field within the same sort of area within Marconi, I think, and so she thinks his suicide was actually a legitimate suicide. But you have to ask yourself, what drives someone who was formerly very happy and productive in his work and an expert in his field to do that? As we'll see in a minute though, Victor Moore was crucial to the discovery of what this nano oil could do, and I hope the quote's coming up next. Have we gone too far again? Okay, I can't read these. You can read these out.
So it's Mr. X and Victor Moore.
Sorry,
Tell us.
Yeah, you're right. Mr. X. Alex Newell, who wrote the book, who communicated with me about the blue ET race.
Oh, right, yeah.
Basically, he ended up having to go to... something happened with his car where let's just say a new technology got put back on his car, but it seems in error, and this car was a Jaguar. The component, when he took it to the garage, he sold the car on. The component got sent back to Jaguar in Coventry, I believe, and... amazingly enough, because when they saw this component, they then sent people from the Royal Institute of
International Affairs.
Well done. I keep forgetting that. International Affairs, RIA, who are from Chatsworth House.
Which is a bit strange.
Well, very strange. He claimed these were like two men that claimed they were engineers, but they flashed this RIA cars. Now, RIA Chatsworth House is huge, and according to...
But isn't it to do with intelligence and stuff like that?
It seemed to be international commerce, and it seems to cover the very weird issues, and if you want to get doors opened, you flash your rear card and it gets done, because it's where a lot of, if you go online, you'll find a picture with Reagan, Thatcher, the Queen. Everyone seems to be there under this Chatham House structure.
So what were they doing visiting this guy?
They had come because Jaguar had sent them to find out why on earth this component from his engine management system had been printed on a circuit board in a certain way they'd never seen before, and I think they'd also then traced his car, basically in one of his contacts, the car got taken along with him, as you mentioned a case the other day. The car got lifted by the ship and taken as well. So the car, I think, got tested, and they said, has your car been in touch with high voltage equipment? So they got to the suspicions about what was going on. So essentially, this Mr. X heard about this case via this whole network, British, South African intelligence, very much linked to the British, whole links there that go back obviously from the history of South Africa. So Mr. X was an agent that had dealt in this area, and he gradually, while Alec Newell was in prison as part of this, refusing to reveal this alien information, the contact information, Mr. X, the South African intelligence agency, came to visit him, and they struck up a sort of friendship. So gradually, a lot of this came later, but those quotes there are very telling.
So what it says is that my contact in South Africa even knew one of the Marconi guys, as he studied with him in the UK years before, and that he's meaning Victor Moore. He was the one that had noticed when the oil was switched on, they started to get interference with their weather satellites. Well, that's really interesting. That's from Alex Newell, Personal Communication, 2011. And continuing the quote, This friend let slip one day about a new robotic fluid their computer and engineer guys were working with that could be programmed with radio frequencies. Well, they thought they might be able to use it hydraulically, which would open up all kinds of new design fields. When he asked around, nobody knew who invented it or where it might have even come from, nor even any talk of patents to buy from another company.
Mm-hmm.
Coevolution, that's Alec Newald's book, 2010.
Yeah. So again, astounding that you've got this
club, astounding,
this club of these Marconi engineers who probably know everyone there is to know within the high-tech field, and intelligence officers around the world, and they can't find where on earth this special robotic fluid has come from, which sort of, even in the 80s, I'm sure the technology was such that sort of thing was well known. If a new invention came around, it was probably around the world in a few days. And
I mean, you can't quite imagine that. I mean, can you? It just doesn't make sense. So,
no.
Where has it come from?
Yep. So again, the important point there is that Victor Moore was the guy that noticed when this oil was switched on. Now,
yes, he was the one who was the head guy there.
This whole idea is, and we'll come to see this a little bit later. I've got much time to go into it. That essentially it seems that this oil is placed underground in certain locations in the planet, and so long as it remains under pressure, it's beneath the seabed, several layers down, and at cold temperatures, then it stays dormant. The moment it gets warm, and certainly then also if it's catalyzed by seawater, the whole process, this thing starts activating and morphing and starts doing this job that
do we know yet whether we have any thoughts about whether this oil is a natural part of the earth forming, or whether it was specifically put there by some others at some other point? Any ideas, any thoughts from your research over 2 years?
My feeling was that as we were seeded on this planet, that of course if you were part of an alien federation that had said we're going to put a new form of human beings on this rather beautiful planet, and let's let them evolve and see how they go on, but if they fuck up and they become warmongers and they essentially start destroying each other and all this stuff, and become a threat to other races in the universe, and dirty their own nest, as the phrase goes, then what better way to do it in a rather cruel way to then be able to? I mean, Alex Jones from the Prometheus clips uses the term a genetic rewrite of the planet, a reboot of the planet, and I thought, God, Alex has come on a long way, because he didn't used to touch this stuff at all, and he's basically saying, well, look, these beings are essentially after a genetic reboot of the planet, where stuff is then there, it's then activated from outer space by these aliens. Then agree, they go, yep, they've gone the wrong way, they're too busy dealing in shares on the stock market, and they're not interested in and all the other things that they could be doing, and going into space, all the other sort of stuff. So let's get rid of them, activate the magic nano oil. How they managed to activate it, and it's catalyzed by seawater, and then I think there's
considering how much seawater there is on the planet Earth.
Well, this goes back to what Alex Newald was told, that apparently Mars used to be a very sea-based planet, and he thinks this was one of the reasons why Mars also went. And you ask yourself, if this has been put on the planet in certain places, and there seems to be certain places they've put it there for specific reasons, from what we can gather, why, you've got to keep going back, why were they in a rush that they'd had this base in Argentina, in this frozen place, since World War I? They've been in this panic to de-engineer this. This is the words they use. We were de-engineering this substance, and they've been worse for several years to get this substance to not trigger or not operate. And I think it's perhaps linked to the whole 2012 scenario in some way. There's something to do with a signal that's set to come. Either the human race has had a timeline to evolve. This is what this 2012, all this idea about transcendence, or will it be a disaster? Is it something to do with some cosmic ray signal that will operate this stuff, and then will terraform the planet in a certain way? And will it terraform just us and leave communications in those days? Fair enough, the internet wasn't around. I'm sure people would be aware within the intelligence circles, within the MOD, the Americans, sort of. Someone would know if such a thing was about and existed. Well, these people who were in the know couldn't find any trace of where this thing had come from. And the important point, again, from the whole idea that Victor Moore was the guy that noticed this black material, this black nano oil was switched on. So he must have somehow worked with the guys that were computer interfacing, and they found that this stuff could be switched on in a certain way, and when it did, global satellites started to have interference. So that's a key point. That my view after looking into this is start thinking about communications between Earth as a sort of sentient organism and outer space and other beings that may be out into space that are receiving this, because it seems there's a feedback between the two. So this fluid can both send out signals at certain points and also receive signals.
This is astonishing that this information's more than 30 years old.
And yet no one's heard anything about this. Within intelligence circles, when you hear it, you find out a bit more about Mr. X. You find out that he's known little bits about. Even he is central to South African intelligence and has worked in Antarctica, another place where we think this oil can be got at, and people are currently trying to get at it. Many nations are building bases down there, doing this strange deep sea drilling, which seems to have another agenda. But even he, knew a little bit about this. So this is as high as it gets. We'll see that the global powers, right until recently, a couple of years ago, there was a global standoff that we think was over this issue deep underneath the Gulf of Mexico. My main aim with this research was to try and focus on what was sort of tangible and had come out of the contactee literature and out of books like Tony Collins.
And to try and look at some science behind it, try and discover
and just to see that, those aspects that we could literally pin down. And of course, as we know in this field, pinning down stuff is very difficult. This information gets ridiculed, so you have to take a little sort of step beyond your own confines of what you believe is real in some way. But I think with a lot of this stuff, you'll see some very tangible and real aspects to it. So
origins of humankind with a super race of near immortal genetic engineers who are contemplating a genetic overwrite or rewrite of the planet Earth.
The concept of the myth of Prometheus is about taking fire from the gods and obtaining this knowledge that they weren't supposed to have. And in the film Prometheus, the humans arrive on this planet, they've heard some sort of rumour, they arrive there and they find that these ETs are developing and awakening this dark fluid, which when they go near it starts to morph into strange creatures, and the story is that they were about to use this to launch onto the planet. With the X-Files, you find that the very scene that I chopped up and showed a kid falling down underground in the background. They'd made sure that they showed oil wells pumping away in the background, sort of metaphorical thing that's going on, and the kid that falls down ends up getting covered in this black fluid and basically is ill and dies. And they bring in the hazmat people, they bring in the NSA. So X-Files, as well as Prometheus, has these tones of this black oil substance. So
that has sentience.
What I thought, given that the guy never used to touch the ET issue at all and used to make mockery jokes about little green men, he's changed over the years, and of course, so he just did that, the whole take on Prometheus, mentioning the whole alien issue. One thing I thought that would highlight the whole idea that, Jan, you asked about, the whole idea of this oil being sentient, what this whole idea of nanotech means. And one issue that many people are aware of, which of course possibly links to the chemtrails, if you look into some of the research that's been done into it, is this whole very weird bioagents called Morgellons. People basically develop lesions and bizarre wires
protrude from the skin.
Awful, nasty injuries. What's also happened, I was in touch with a Dutch researcher that basically found out, he was a microbiologist, he found out that Morgellons exhibited this thing called quorum sensing, Quorum, quorum sensing. This is the ability for these individual components within the bloodstream and this part of this bioagent to communicate with each other and to receive signals inward from an external stimuli. So again, you've got this whole idea that you've got this high-tech bioagent that people are coming down with all over the world. It both seems to be influenced by certain frequencies inside. They contain self-replicating nanotubes. Well, that's a very recent development. You find that ETs have carbon nanotubes in their implants. I was trying to make the point between, if we think that this nanofluid that they got from the Falkland Islands is a planetary-based terraforming agent, then I thought, well, this Morgellons thing that's been around for some time may be more of a human biological one, because what that seems to do is sort of terraform the body into its own bizarre sci-fi entity. Wasn't around before chemtrailing to my knowledge, and they have found these very same filaments in some samples of Dr. Mike Castle has found the very same elements that come down in chemtrails from chemtrail residue. They've then, under a microscope, have taken these out of people's bodies, raised sensors, and the other important point is they found that these the other nano configurations associated with Morgellons theory carry genetically altered spliced DNA or RNA. as we said, respond to frequency input. So there's a current example of nanotechnology in action, the exact match, which is highly scary because it suggests that the military or whoever are flying these grey tanker aircraft, which are not commercial aircraft as everyone think, these are black tanker aircraft, that are dropping this stuff, that someone is messing around with nanotech and trying to get the human body. The black oil we're on about is a planetary terraforming agent from what we gather, but the Morgellons thing seems to just attack the human host. So you've got two different things, but the point I wondered about is, are these two linked in some ways? Because before we heard about all of this nano oil and its ability to be sentient and to respond to signals, people were saying that someone came out from the military, surname was Griffiths. He claimed that this was what they call a binary bioweapon, that it functioned two parts. So you give the first part out, as you get people then get infected with the so-called Morgellons bioagent. After that, you then introduce and activate that agent by use of frequencies when the condition. So essentially, when they want to create chaos or something even more out of this world, they then activate human beings that are infected by this. And according to one researcher, Cliff Carnicom, who's done a huge amount, amazing, done it all on his own time, he's done a specific test with blood and urine. He complains that we all have the basics of this Morgellons. A frightening thing he's found out from doing what he's done blood and urine tests, but he also developed this test called the red wine spitting test, where red wine be flushy. You put it under a microscope, you then see this sort of thing, certain moving things that even move when people spit them into the bowls.
He's actually been working with a naturopath on this.
Called Jan Smith.
About the black tanker planes, they are also using commercial aircraft, and I know this for a fact because...
I've never believed that.
I'll tell you why I know this for a fact, because Andrew Johnson has a piece of equipment that tracks aircraft. And he was tracking them when I happened to be visiting on some. Just look at this, and he was as shocked as I was. He had just looked at the trailing going overhead. He will reflect back the number, the name of the plane, and everything.
It's the transponder thing.
Not everything does that, but it was an EasyJet one, and he went, "My God, look at that!" And it wasn't just EasyJet. There were others, but there were others that weren't reflecting back information. So I've seen it with my own eyes.
Our case that they are painting tankers up as with EasyJet logos, and because you're basically then suggesting that you've got passengers on board commercial airplanes that are spraying this stuff out the side, because it doesn't come through the engines. That's this big misnomer that it comes through the jet. It doesn't come through the jet engines. It's a separate system. And I was running the Chemtrails UK sites back in 19.
It was just interesting because I actually saw that and I thought, wow, it's one of those things. If you hadn't seen it, you wouldn't have believed it. Yes, if you read it. So these are bullet points which are really flagging up points about this substance. It says it stays dormant under pressure and cold, i.e. deep into the seabed. It appears to be in several regions around the planet. It reacts to warmth and is catalysed by seawater. It can morph into a vast variety of forms within its chemical structure, and it appears to cause illness in humans in some circumstances. It sends signals when activated and has some magnetic qualities. It says, remember, if the Falklands situation is true, this substance may have been in use for over a decade.
Wow. Is actually called, it's been named algae, AUGIE. Now, that's not its chemical structure, but this does have links to gold in some way. Part of its chemical structure that it can replicate gold, and under certain circumstances, apparently it can replicate gold. And Alec Neword has done a whole essay on how this links to monatomic gold. There's some link between these two. This next part, which is to me the most mind-blowing of this whole episode, in some circumstances it makes some people ill. Point is, it has magnetic qualities and also is catalysed by seawater. So April of 2010, Horizon in the Gulf of Mexico, the Americans were drilling, very deep drilling. They had to get Environmental Protection Agency to go through it. They had to pay millions of pounds worth of insurance just to make sure, because for some reason they wanted to do this deep drilling. Now, if you look into this whole issue of abiotic oil, which came around at the time of peak oil, claimed that is an oil that's deep beneath the Earth's crust and it replenishes itself. Now, this came around as peak oil came around, and the argument was that, well, peak oil doesn't matter because we have suddenly found this abiotic oil that doesn't come from dinosaurs, comes from deep within the Earth and magically just replaces itself. Now, I think there's some weird confusion that's gone on and some disinformation that's gone on. I don't know if abiotic oil even exists. I think in the intelligence and oil circles, what may have happened is this stuff, this nano oil, this algae as it's called, may have been confused with this whole idea of this self-replicating morphing oil, and so it's suddenly come up as an excuse for this peak oil thing that we've got lots of oil and it's deep down, it's buried deep down in the Earth's crust, or certainly far deeper than you have to drill. Several locations where this stuff seems to have been deposited. One of these areas, and this is Alec Newell's theory, again the guy that wrote the book on the blue ETs, that 65 million years ago is where the meteor hit that killed off the dinosaurs. He thinks that maybe on board this meteorite that hit, it went so deep and created this vast crater in the Gulf of Mexico that this may have carried this black nano oil substance, and it essentially embedded itself into the earth at a deep level. Now, when you start to look into what BP were doing down there, very strange, because a certain instance ended up taking place, which was fed to. There's a forum online called Godlight Productions. Now, Godlight Productions, well known amongst the conspiracy scene as a very low signal to noise ratio. An awful lot of junk gets posted up there, but it seems to be a conduit for now and then for certain people. You can post anonymously, and people will certainly post certain things up that then actually you see then begin to be played out in the wider geopolitical structures that we then see in our newspapers, perhaps in a slightly different way. What Nexus magazine did is actually create a document that basically, instead of save people going through all this, they created a document that basically summed up this situation. And I'll pull up a copy of this. Everyone does is go and find this on Godlight Productions website, and you can still, it's called the Berserk thread, Bezerk, and this is all translated from French. What happened was the boyfriend, this is the supposed situation, the boyfriend of a girlfriend who worked fairly high up in the French diplomatic embassy, I presume, or some diplomatic structure within France, phoned him one day and said, something big is going off, we've been put on this stage of alert. Now, she had clearance for a laptop that she used at times, and the laptop was left at home. This laptop had this open channel that allowed him to actually watch what was taking place in real time. In April, refers to my notes, in April 2010, you have which we all know about, you have the Horizon Gulf oil disaster, which they claim was due to drilling. Now, there's loads of information I could go into here about how even Halliburton engineers came up and said, you're drilling so deep, you need to, if you're going to go this deep, you need to encase it in this much bracing concrete. There's methods of when you get to the seabed, concrete will not hold this, there's so much pressure down there. But Halliburton was saying you need different methods, and they ignored some of this. But obviously then what happened, we had this vast explosion with oil. Months after this, so we have the date at the top there,
June 26,
so
2010.
you're looking at two months after this. It seems to me, reading between the lines, the international community were highly suspicious of this disaster, and you essentially have a standoff with up to 13 nations, all with submarines, some with fleets on top in the Gulf of Mexico. Most of it rotated around a French submarine. But you need to go and read this for yourself, because he calls it the DED channels, and he basically, again, don't forget this was translated from French into English. So the OP, that means the original poster, describes the DED as digital emergency scrambling device. And Duncan from Nexus magazine is writing the introduction to this. My understanding of DED channels is that they are opened and used by people like key defence and government military officials, ships captains, aircraft pilots, etc. The channels are activated as necessary and seem to pertain to non-routine, interesting, operating incidents, mainly military, it seems. In other words, the channels are designed to get decisions from the right people when unexpected situations occur that could affect, in this case, could affect French military and diplomatic interests.
That they believe that this channel is used for communication about unidentified, intelligently controlled objects in the air, in space and underwater.
I forgot that bit, and that's pretty crucial. Also, I mean, just things like he knew that they also had a channel above this called the vector channel, which it was encrypted, and what made me think this whole thing was real is this guy said, all right, well, my girlfriend and I, we don't have access to this channel. They switched to this vector channel at certain key moments.
Yeah.
So,
and what seems to start it off, look, is that he noticed some French chatter, seemed to indicate that a French submarine has been attacked.
What seems to have happened is, for a few days prior to that, in fact, it seems perhaps maybe while the actual Deep Horizon oil rig event was taking place, there was a lot of international interest in what was going on there. My theory is, and I think after looking into this area for some time, is that they knew that deep it may have had a dual purpose. It may well have been looking for oil, but it may well be something to do with trying to find out what this substance is, or there's a more nefarious angle that we'll come to at the end, that they may actually be trying to trigger the release of this nano substance,
Right.
because what you find is a standoff between certain nations, and it's an amazing, it reads like a spy novel, but I'm 100% sure, I'm 90% sure that this is all authentic. It was things like this that made me realise that this had come from some sort of diplomatic channel. So they were using code words. So EM was the code for MROs, that's the French nuclear power submarine. GCP refers to an unknown French submarine vessel being used by, this is the Grupo, you're better with languages than
The
me.
commandos, parachute. So like the SAS.
He gave names of vessels. Pourquoi Pas was a French research vessel that was in the area. Another one, Prazuk, a French military spokesman that obviously does exist. French nuclear-powered submarine, Condition Romeo. So there are all these code words that's going on. That's just a few of them that they tried to give a key to help understand all these things. Essentially what happened, I mean, it's interesting the number of governments that are actually involved in this. They weren't all in one place. So his girlfriend said something crazy is going on the DED channels, and he's got the laptop link. 11:09 a.m. This is remember, he was posting, this isn't as this was now, he was posting this live at the time on the web. 11:09 a.m. on the 26th of June, something like 10% of the world's submarines are gathered in the Gulf of Mexico. DED.
That's huge, isn't it?
DED, this communications channel, shows 12 US, 2 French, 3 British, 2 Russian, 1 Canadian, 3 German, 1 Israeli, and 2 unknown submarines. What's interesting further on is you find that the Americans start sending above water naval vessels, ships, that are flying the American flag but have no international radio identifier nor any identification on the ship itself. So although they're flying the American flag to say they're in American waters, then they have no way of identifying who these ships belong to, whether they're Army, Navy or whatever. She then goes on to basically say that the French has had a damaged submarine, has had to try and surface. They've had sailors injured. This was from an attack from what we think was attack from a US helicopter. Sailors bleeding after this attack. They were trying to get. What appears to have happened is the French military submarine had gone down beneath the platform, right to the very deep depths, and had tried to get a sample of a certain thing. Well, you tell me, if this is a simple oil rig that's just searching for oil, are you going to go down there and try and get a sample of their oil for some reason? The US found out that this sample had been taken on board. It gets referred to as Cargo B. And the Americans demand, we find this somewhere down here, they demand that this cargo is jettisoned. So they're obviously all in communication, and this whole standoff then takes place between. It's very interesting because you have the US submarine and the US that are on the surface, US, UK, and Israelis on one side protecting the Gulf. This rim of where this, I think, is where these sonic drills or whatever have gone in, that we're doing this bizarre drilling underneath the deep horizon oil platform, and the circling around them on the outer limit are the other nations that are somehow then trying to protect the French vessel to let it get out of the waters with this cargo. They keep trying to detach this cargo from the submarine to give it to their French special forces that are then waiting on the surface, because obviously I think the submarine's in trouble. The submarine's in trouble for 2 reasons. One, because it's been shot at by the American helicopter. The other reason is when it was forced to surface, which I can't work out whether that was to do with the helicopter chute or because they started processing some of this magic cargo and things started going wrong with their reactor, things started going wrong with their radar, they started having big problems. Their hull became magnetized in a way that was problematic for their guidance systems. There was big whooshes of black magnetic stuff is how they describe it, and this started to interfere with how the submarine managed to function. Someone told me that submarines the hull relies on a certain formatized in a certain way, whether that's for guidance or whatever, and something was interfering with this. Here's the point where at 3:25 on that first day says there, unidentified. Remember, this is in the US waters. I think it's
unauthenticated.
Unauthenticated. I don't know how much of the Gulf is US owned territories and how much is international, and whether there was all this talk about quarantining them because they were in US waters. Unauthenticated. You're right. US ship demands the release and jettison of detained cargo. Captain of the French submarine refuses. Ports. We're gonna have to skim through of some of this because you need to go and read it for yourself. But we're now on June the 28th, so these submarines are still down there. Here, I kept coming across the British and the Americans, the 1950s onwards, being part of operations deep freeze and anti-freeze. Kept coming up, very blatant about them, to the point where I even found that they launched a military and cargo ship only last year, and they were starting Operation Deep Freeze was starting again, and they were off down to the Antarctic. Well, the code words that kept coming up in this French diplomatic channel were 300 and 301, and when she asked about these were operations deep freeze and antifreeze. These were apparently the codes for these. Something about engines not working. This is to do with the problems that they have when the magnetic type oil substance starts to interfere with ships' hulls and also with submarines. They start having huge problems with the way things operate. Names that I've been checked up of that were mentioned on these channels, like these are icebreakers like Polar Bear and Polar Cat, Polar Sea. Interestingly, these all exist. One of these a week later went into repair at a dock in America because it also had a problem with its hull. Interestingly, Argentina turns up as well. It shows 3 new submarines, 2 are from Argentina. Somehow the submarines, except the US and British, are coordinating with each other because they form a ring around the rim. This is the rim again where this drilling is going down. The French engineers in the submarine had to go and disarm these very high-tech sonic that sounded virtually like weapons that were protecting the rim around where this platform was drilling for this oil, because the only way they could get in through this perimeter was because whoever, BP or the US, whoever had placed these ultra high-tech sonic alarms that apparently were highly dangerous. There must have been some sort of weaponized thing that I think disable submarines. That's the gist I got.
Right.
But you have this standoff, and that's an interesting point. Somehow the submarines, except the US and the British, are coordinating with each other because they form a ring around the rim. So the rim is where these drills are going down, and where I presume the French have got the sample of this oil from. Again, we start to then get very strange things. The French submarine starts to disappear. They start to then make, with their special forces on board, people have died in this. There's people who were seriously injured. They call it activated of B3 cargo. Cargo is actually this special oil substance. There's an issue to do with this transmitter, conditioned Romeo, that's up there about replenishing, replacing. Again, all this diplomatic language that's used. They have problems when they try and jettison this cargo, and to give it to the special forces, they try and jettison it from the submarine. Each time they put it into what they call a buoy. As it then gets into the buoy, it starts foaming and starts reacting with the seawater, and they keep having problems. The buoy just popped within seconds of hitting the foam, melted and sank. Second buoy did the same. Stuff is starting to react in the Gulf. Mistral, this is the French submarine, I think, issued alert to all vicinity of traffic to avoid the column. In other words, stay clear from that area, because the research ship that they'd got there, that was with them the whole time there, that had obviously gone down to look, had got technology on board to analyse this stuff, and they put it through a polymerase chain reaction device.
About that, so these people, it looks like they're asking for a method, an approved method to disperse it, and what's happening is it says they report that the dispersal method that they've obviously been given is inconclusive, nano release still plausible, and suspects nanoengineering because of metallic carbon compound morphing.
Okay, here we go. Pourquoi Pas is a research vessel.
Yep.
I think the international community knows damn well what was going on down. They know about this black magic oil stuff, and so they've sent research vessels down there trying to work out what's going on. There needs to be a playoff between working out what this substance is, but also keeping it safe and stopping it from starting to act, and they had some problems.
Here at 1:40 p.m. 2nd of July, Russian Navy requesting urgent assistance from French naval assets to help with inbound tracking possible splash zones.
Okay, splash zones appears to be this international code for where this stuff starts to escape.
Has escaped, yeah, absolutely, has broken free.
EM, that's the captain of the military submarine, reports sonic drilling at breakpoint levels from 3 drills. British submarines moving away from the rim. Mistral instructs the Emeralds, that's the French submarine, to do the same and keep a safe perimeter. So what these sonic drills are doing...
possible large cave-in on sea floor.
Emerald's French submarine captain reporting outer hull skin sensors are now picking up flocking of metallic-like fibres and attaching to rubberized skin. Erosion warning active but low. Also minor sonar distortion.
It looks like the French Special Forces at 10:49 there requested jettison authorization twice. Mistral, the sub first denied, then approved, but after 80% verification, there was some situation on board the submarine, and the captain reported that every crew member got a vote. The crew unanimously voted to detain B3 cargo and proceed. And they want full naval escort. Jesus, what the hell's going on?
If you look here, the research vessel Pourquoi Pas, so they've got an 80% verification that I presume it is this.
Here we've got it affecting people. The MO'd captain, they're reporting some crew feeling disorientated. EM to do isotope readings immediately on port side where the metallic fibre flocking was worse and growing. Here's the gold mentioned.
The gold's mentioned here, isotope of gold. No idea why that's come through at that point. Again, some of this is pretty random because it's been translated from French, and also this was a...
this is very important, listen to this. The PP, the ship, the vessel, confirmed the discovery of an unknown prehistoric organism which, through nanoengineering and extreme depth and pressure, morphs compounds found in this new oil with seawater into gold. My God. However, there is a drawback, a massive and absolutely cataclysmic one.
Okay, let me just clear something out before people think that this wasn't stuff that was then communicated through these diplomatic channels. This was the girlfriend of the guy that was sat feeding this information to the forum. This was her going around and asking the more senior diplomats and the military officials what exactly was going on. She's obviously highly trusted. If this case is authentic, she's highly trusted. So because she was part of the team dealing with this emergency, she kept trying to find out bits about what was going on. Because obviously it's a confusing situation, and she was then passing it on. I find it astounding. The bit I found astounding was well, also on the level is how on earth did she manage to keep managing to communicate quite sensitive stuff to him? I mean, that's one thing I did have a sort of issue with. Would the diplomatic service allow? Maybe because she's sub-staff. She's brought in when other staff are busy to do other work, so maybe there's some slight lapse in security there. I don't know, but interestingly, the gold keeps morphing. This translation problem into something else. They can't stop it aboard. So things start happening all the way to a coup d'etat when the evacuations begin. The French Naval Command, they're trying to get out of the area, and they're afraid that the Americans will try and basically take control of their ship again. The Americans are still after them, dropping this substance. I think it's mainly because they've got proof of this stuff. That the US Navy will try a coup when the US government asks citizens to leave coastal areas.
At 11th of July, 6:11 a.m, PP confirms organism is attracted to darker pigmentation. Some Special Forces crew, French, showing no effect at all during quarantine. They remain healthy. Okay, 13th of July, 5:32 p.m. Okay, the second unknown submarine captain indicated that he has clear video footage and evidence of who sabotaged the Deepwater Horizon oil rig. The EM captain, that's the MO'd captain, the French one, has concurred on this. What happened now in the past 2 hours is the same culprit is back, and they are asking permission to take them out now within the next few minutes before they strike again.
Well, a cliffhanger sort of ending to a very weird instance, but the gist of that, I think, the gist, if I read around the forum, was that was an Israeli sub that had been caught using these sonic drills to damage and cause this pollution problem. And one issue that this lady, who is an expert in the Gulf cleanup of this oil, she claims that oil cleaning technology has not changed in 40 years. In 40 years, the methods of cleaning up oil spill has remained the same. What's interesting, of course, is we have use of this substance called correxite for the first time ever for this oil disaster, that Halliburton brought in this special substance. Apparently is much better because you pour it all over the oil spill. And
this is Dick Cheney's company.
Good old Dick Cheney's company. How many million gallons did they pour onto the sea? I heard a figure. But so for some reason, this disaster under the use of this brand new, even more toxic chemical called correxite. You've got to ask yourself, why all of a sudden are they using this really toxic substance that stops, instead of the oil slick spreading and coming to the surface, it creates it into a very viscous solution and holds it part way underwater.
Because I have to tell you, there were absolutely hundreds and hundreds of options sent, and they were ignored, every last one. Even Kevin Costner's special oceanic cleansing.
Costner's,
you know, but there were many. There weren't one or two. And John Hutchinson actually made a big inroad there using sonic frequencies. Interesting to clear, and it was successful to some degree.
Yep, and Jeff Rentz claims that literally putting straw into the water and dragging it out will clear most oil spills. Very rudimentary, but has always worked in the past. All those methods you just mentioned were banned by the Environmental Agency. They were not allowed to be used. So ask yourself, what if this situation is true and you have an international standoff beneath this Deep Horizon oil rig where this very strange substance has started leaking and has made people ill and has caused an international incident? Why do we suddenly get this correct site stuff?
Certainly, there have been quite a few instances now of people who swum in the Gulf there and have become incredibly ill. I mean, life-threateningly ill. And there is no support, no help for them whatsoever from the Americans, from their own people.
You have 13 nations, all with special forces and submarines, high-tech submarines down, ready in that area, almost as if they knew something was going on, and a standoff between the US, the UK, the Israelis, and then the rest of these nations, all trying to deal with it. And the French seem to be brave enough to try and run off with a test of this cargo. I think they knew what was going on down there. I think they knew that BP mixed with Halliburton and others know what's down there, that Alex Newell is right, and where this meteorite hit in the Gulf of Mexico caused a deposit of this special nano substance. What they're trying to accelerate, as we know the rather sick bastards try and do sometimes, because they've got their underground bases, which you can't go into. I have a whole series of what's going on in Antarctica with the nature of Lake Vostok, this place called the Dome, where they're also doing this deep drilling, and lo and behold, British scientists went back. I've got another quote here. British scientists went down there, did some drilling, and came back ill. They had to be picked up because they came back ill after doing this drilling. Well, I'm sure there are many ways to get ill in Antarctica. One's getting a cold, bitten by a penguin, but it seems that lots of scientists seem to come back sick from doing this drilling in Antarctica and around Lake Vostok. But can I just finish what I was going to say on this point? Because we know that certain members of the Illuminati, you want to call them, seem to want to accelerate the demise of a certain species and the dominance of their own. I think they know exactly what this substance is. I think they may even be in league with some of the ETs, that's perhaps the blue ETs that Alex Newell linked with. They're in league with maybe the opposite side of those. Sounds very simplistic, but may just be the case. I think the Americans and the Israelis, and maybe the British, by the sounds of it, if that part was true, are trying to get this stuff out from where it's safe, deep down in the Earth's crust, where it's cold and under pressure. As we found out, it's safe, it lies dormant. They're trying to get it to start and come out en masse, mix with seawater, and start this terraforming process where it slowly starts to take over the food chain. It kills the food chain. We lose if we lose the ocean, we lose our food supply. We lose the weather balance. All sorts of stuff starts to happen.
Well, we've seen already that it's already affecting weather satellites.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing. There's another side to this about this stuff also sending signals out from beneath the wall of China. There's a few other things. The other side to this is also perhaps linked to maybe SDI, the Star Wars thing, which we haven't had time to go into. Anthony Sanchez has done a whole load of work on, very strangely, that suddenly in the 1990s, a whistleblower came out of a very high-level military corporation and basically said, we've got these new nano satellites. He goes, these satellites function with a basically AI-driven nano intelligence, and these satellites are designed to protect us from an incoming group of hostile ETs. That's the alleged intent. They've been programmed by these high-tech American companies, including apparently from the Dulce base. Fear is this whistleblower came out because he claimed that he didn't trust this AI substance, that these nano satellites that have got weapons on board, lasers, etc. He didn't trust the programming system that was behind all this, because he thought, because it was sentient, because it's been programmed by ETs maybe a certain way, that it may end up turning on us.
I think there is so much we need to explore with this, David. thank you for endless amount of work to bring in all this together, because it's certainly brought together a lot of dots for me. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Absolutely great. And thanks for listening, and let us know if you've got any more ideas on this.